Eleanor felt the exhaustion deep in her bones, a heavy, weary thing that had settled there months ago and refused to leave. It lived in the ache of her feet from standing for 10 hours, in the perpetual stickiness of her skin from the diner's greasy air, and in the frantic beat of her heart whenever she looked at the pile of bills on her small kitchen table. The scent of stale coffee and fried onions clung to her uniform like a second skin, a constant reminder of her life, balanced on the edge of a knife. She moved through the clatter and sizzle of the Greasy Spoon diner on autopilot, her smile a brittle, practiced thing she put on with her apron. Her world had shrunk to the size of this diner and the 2-room apartment she shared with her son, Leo. He was 7, a bright spark of a boy with eyes that saw far too much of his mother's worry. He was the reason for the brittle smile, the aching feet, the endless shifts. He was her whole world, a sun in her otherwise gray sky. Every night she would return to their cramped apartment, the floorboards creaking a weary welcome, and the first thing she did was check on him, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest as he slept. That sight was the only thing that refilled the well of her strength. The diner itself was a microcosm of struggle. The vinyl on the booths was cracked, weeping yellow foam in places. The fluorescent lights hummed a dreary, constant tune, casting a pallid glow on the chipped formica countertops. Yet, it was a living place, filled with the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of cutlery, and the sharp hiss of the grill. For most people, it was a brief stop for a cheap meal. For Eleanor, it was the entire battlefield where she fought for her and Leo's survival, 1 cup of coffee, 1 plate of eggs at a time. In the corner booth, the one furthest from the door, sat the Sons of Vulcan. They were a daily fixture, as reliable as the sunrise. 4 of them, usually, clad in worn leather vests adorned with the fiery emblem of a volcano. They were large men, etched with tattoos that snaked up their arms and necks, their faces maps of hard-lived lives. They rarely spoke above a low rumble, their presence a silent, intimidating weight in the room. Other patrons gave them a wide berth. Eleanor served them with the same strained politeness she gave everyone, her hands trembling slightly as she placed their mugs on the table. They were just customers, but they felt like something more, something ancient and dangerous. Then there was Mr. Abernathy. He was the opposite of the bikers in every conceivable way. He arrived each day at noon sharp, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent. He was a pillar of the community, a wealthy developer whose name was on half the new buildings downtown. He dripped condescension, treating Eleanor not as a person but as a function, a pair of hands to bring him his steak, medium rare, and his sparkling water with a precise slice of lemon. His smile never reached his cold, assessing eyes. Eleanor's struggle was a quiet, desperate hum beneath the surface of her days. It was the frantic calculation in her head as she took Abernathy's order. If his tip was decent, she might be able to afford the good milk for Leo's cereal. It was the fear that coiled in her stomach when her car made a new, ominous rattling sound. She was invisible, a ghost in an apron, navigating a world that seemed designed to grind people like her into dust. Her dignity was a flickering candle she shielded with cupped hands, determined not to let the harsh winds of her reality extinguish it completely. That Tuesday started like any other. The air was thick with the morning rush, a frantic ballet of orders and plates. Eleanor moved through it all, a blur of motion. Leo was in a small booth near the kitchen, coloring quietly in a book she'd bought him from the dollar store. He had a slight fever that morning, and she couldn't afford to miss a shift, nor could she leave him home alone. So he sat, a small, quiet island in the diner's chaotic sea, his presence both a comfort and another knot of worry in her gut. She'd given him a plate of pancakes, watching him carefully push them around with his fork, his appetite gone. Mr. Abernathy arrived precisely at noon, his expensive shoes clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. He slid into his usual booth without a glance at her. "The usual, Eleanor, and be quick about it. I have an important meeting." His voice was clipped, impatient, as if her entire existence was an inconvenience to his schedule. "Yes, Mr. Abernathy, right away," she murmured, her pen flying across her notepad. She hurried to the kitchen, the order ticket skewered with a sharp jab. Her mind was already on Leo, wondering if his fever had gone up. She felt stretched thin, a rubber band pulled to its absolute limit. In the corner, the sons of Vulcan watched. They were quiet, nursing their coffees. The man they called Forge, their leader, had eyes that missed nothing. He saw the dark circles under the waitress's eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept glancing towards the little boy in the booth. He saw the manufactured arrogance of the man in the suit. He and his brothers had seen this play 1,000 times in 1,000 different towns. It was a story as old as time, the powerful preying on the weak. The moment it all shattered came with a simple, clumsy mistake. Juggling a tray laden with Abernathy's steak, another customer's sandwich, and a full glass of sparkling water, Eleanor's worn-out shoe caught on a loose bit of tile. For a heart-stopping second, she fought for balance, her body twisting. The steak and sandwich remained on the tray, but the glass of water tipped, a slow-motion catastrophe. It arced through the air and splashed directly onto the sleeve of Mr. Abernathy's pristine gray suit jacket. Everything stopped. The clatter of the diner seemed to fade into a dull roar in Eleanor's ears. Cold dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone. The dark, wet stain on the expensive fabric was a condemnation. Abernathy looked down at his sleeve as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face, usually a mask of smug indifference, contorted into a mask of pure fury. "You clumsy, incompetent fool!" he roared, leaping to his feet. The entire diner fell silent. Every eye turned to their booth. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? It's more than you make in a month. Look at what you've done." Eleanor stood frozen, clutching the now empty tray to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Abernathy, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I tripped." Her voice was a small, trembling thing. Apologies felt useless, like trying to patch a gaping wound with a tiny bandage. "An accident?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Your incompetence is the accident. I've had enough of your pathetic service. I'm a friend of Mr. Henderson, the owner of this pathetic establishment, a very good friend. I will make sure that by the end of the day, you are out on the street where you belong." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Losing this job wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. It meant no rent, no food, no medicine for Leo. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful, blurring the furious face of the man in front of her. This was it. The breaking point. The moment the flickering candle of her dignity was finally snuffed out by a torrent of undeserved cruelty. From his small booth, Leo saw it all. He saw the water spill. He saw the mean man's face turn ugly. He saw the tears shining in his mother's eyes. His 7-year-old world, which revolved entirely around the son of his mother's love, felt a sudden, terrifying eclipse. Fear warred with a fierce protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. He saw his mother, the strongest person he knew, looking small and broken, and he knew, with the simple, unclouded certainty of a child, that it was wrong. While the rest of the diner's patrons stared, frozen in a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, Leo slipped out of his booth. His small legs carried him across the floor, not towards his mother, but towards the corner booth, towards the 4 large, leather-clad men who looked like the villains from his cartoons. But his mother had always taught him to ask for help when he needed it, and right now, his mother needed help more than anything. He stopped beside their table, his chin barely clearing the top. He looked directly at the man with the gray-streaked beard and the calm, steady eyes. Forge. Leo's voice was small but clear, cutting through the tense silence. "Quote 7, he said, his little hands clenched into fists at his sides. Quote Kane 8. Forge looked down at the small boy. He saw no fear in the child's eyes, only a desperate, trusting plea. He saw the reflection of the boy's mother's resilience. He then lifted his gaze, meeting the eyes of his brothers. Grizz, the mountain of a man beside him, gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Razor, the wiry one with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, cracked his knuckles softly. An unspoken agreement passed between them. Their code was simple, but absolute. They did not suffer bullies, and they protected the innocent, especially children. Forge turned his attention back to the unfolding drama. He slowly, deliberately pushed his chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the linoleum was unnaturally loud in the silent room. He stood up, and his brothers rose with him. They were not fast or aggressive. Their movements were measured, filled with a massive contained power. They were 4 mountains of leather and muscle uncoiling at once. Abernathy, still ranting at the weeping Eleanor, didn't notice them at first. Quote 9, he snarled. Quote 10. A low voice rumbled from behind him. It was a voice like stones grinding together, calm but carrying an undeniable authority. Abernathy spun around, his face flushed with anger. He waved a dismissive hand, his arrogance blinding him to the shift in power that had just occurred. Forge didn't flinch. He took another slow step forward, placing himself partially in front of Eleanor, a living shield. Grizz and Razor fanned out to his sides, creating a formidable silent wall. They didn't touch Abernathy. They didn't need to. Their very presence was a physical barrier, a clear and unambiguous statement. The woman and her child were now under their protection. Quote 12, Forge stated simply. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact, laid bare. For spilling a glass of water, that makes it our business. Abernathy's face purpled with rage and indignation. He was a man accustomed to deference, to people cowering before his wealth and status. Being challenged by men he considered his social inferiors was an intolerable insult. I'll do more than make her cry, he blustered, trying to regain control. I'll have her fired. I'll sue this dump for the damages to my suit. Now get out of my way before I call the police and have you all thrown in jail. Forge's expression remained placid, almost bored. Go ahead, he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming more menacing in its quietness. Call them. But you should know, my friend Razor here has been filming this entire interaction on his phone since you first raised your voice. He gestured with his chin towards Razor, who held up his phone, the red recording light glowing like a malevolent eye. As have a few of our other associates. He glanced around the diner, and 2 other men Eleanor hadn't even noticed, dressed in plain clothes, subtly angled their phones as well. The trap had been sprung before Abernathy even knew he was in one. Quote 19 Forge continued, his gaze locking onto Abernathy's. We have already sent a copy of that video to Mr. Henderson, the owner. We happened to get his number from a mutual acquaintance. He seemed very interested to see how his very good friend treats his employees. The blood drained from Abernathy's face. The bluster and rage began to curdle into panic. He had catastrophically misjudged the situation. These were not just dumb thugs. They were organized, intelligent, and several steps ahead of him. He looked from Forge's unyielding face to the recording phone to the immovable wall of muscle that was Grizz. He was trapped. Quote 21. Abernathy stammered, his voice losing its authoritative boom. Quote 22. Forge asked, tilting his head slightly. Quote 23. He swept his gaze across the room, and for the first time, other patrons, emboldened by the biker's intervention, began to nod in agreement. A few even took out their own phones. The power had shifted completely. Abernathy, desperate, tried to push past Forge to get to the door. It was a foolish, panicked move. Grizz's arm shot out not to strike but to block. His hand, as large as a dinner plate, simply pressed flat against Abernathy's chest. It was like running into a brick wall. Abernathy stumbled back, his expensive suit now rumpled, his dignity in tatters. The force was controlled, efficient, and utterly humiliating. There was no escape. The wail of a siren grew in the distance. Forge had not been bluffing. Someone had called the authorities. But it was clear they were not coming for the bikers. They were coming for the man in the bespoke suit whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around him in a greasy spoon diner. Eleanor watched, her tears forgotten, a strange sense of disbelief washing over her. These men, these terrifying silent figures from the corner booth, had become her saviors. They were angels in leather. When 2 police officers walked in, the scene was one of surreal calm. The bikers stood quietly, a protective phalanx around Eleanor and Leo. Abernathy was sputtering, trying to explain himself, but his words were a jumble of panicked excuses. The diner patrons were all too eager to tell the officers what they had seen. Forge stepped forward and spoke to the senior officer in a low, respectful tone. Quote 24. He handed over Razor's phone. The officer watched the video, his expression hardening. He listened to 2 other witnesses, then turned to Abernathy. Sir? I think you need to come with us." The downfall was swift and absolute. As the officers escorted a protesting Abernathy out of the diner, his facade of respectability was stripped away, leaving only a petty, cruel bully exposed to the world. But the sons of Vulcan were not finished. Their intervention was not just about one moment of injustice. Their network, a sprawling web of contacts and resources that operated far beyond the confines of a motorcycle club, began to quietly dig into Abernathy's life. What they found was far worse than public bullying. They uncovered a long history of wage theft from his construction company, illegal dumping of building materials, and multiple accusations of harassment from former employees, all of whom had been silenced with threats or flimsy non-disclosure agreements. They compiled their findings into a neat, anonymous package, complete with sworn affidavits from victims they had tracked down and encouraged to speak. The package was delivered not just to the police, but to the most tenacious investigative reporter in the city. The story that followed was explosive. Mr. Abernathy, the pillar of the community, was unmasked as a fraud and a criminal. His empire, built on exploitation and fear, began to crumble. His name, once a symbol of success, became synonymous with disgrace. Back at the diner, the owner, Mr. Henderson, arrived in a panic. He had seen the video. He rushed over to Eleanor, his face pale. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I can't believe he... Please forgive me. Your job is safe. Anything you need. Anything at all." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. It was the profound, dizzying relief of being seen, of being believed. She looked over at Forge, who was now kneeling down, talking quietly to Leo. The big, scarred man was showing her son the intricate tooling on his leather vest, his voice a gentle rumble. The contrast was so stark it made her heart ache with gratitude. The bikers did not simply ride off into the sunset. They had claimed Eleanor and Leo as their own. "You and the boy," Forge told her later, his voice firm but kind. "You're under the club's protection now. No one will ever bother you again." It was a promise made of steel, and they kept it. They learned of her struggles, of the rundown apartment and the unreliable car. Within a week, things began to change. One of the bikers, a mechanic, showed up and fixed her car for free, leaving it running more smoothly than it had in years. Another had a cousin who managed a nicer apartment complex, and suddenly, a clean, safe two-bedroom unit became available at a rent she could actually afford. Forge approached her with a job offer. "A friend of ours runs a bookkeeping firm downtown. He needs a new office manager. It's quiet, 9 to 5, and it pays double what you make here. He knows you're a hard worker. The job is yours if you want it." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she accepted, tears not of shame or fear, but of overwhelming, unbelievable gratitude. She was leaving the greasy spoon behind, shedding the scent of fried onions and despair like an old skin. She was stepping into a new life, one built for her by the most unlikely of saviors. 6 months passed. The change in Eleanor was profound. The gaunt, haunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She excelled at her new job, her sharp mind finally given a chance to shine. She had started taking an online accounting course at night, building a future she had never dared to dream of. Leo was thriving. He was enrolled in a better school near their new apartment. The constant worry that had shadowed his young life had vanished. In its place was the boisterous, loving presence of the sons of Vulcan. They had become his pack of loud, fiercely protective uncles. Grizz taught him how to throw a baseball. Razor helped him with a school project, building an impossibly detailed model of a volcano. Forge would often just sit with him, listening to him talk about his day with a patience and focus that made Leo feel like the most important person in the world. They were a family. A strange, patched-together family of a single mother, her bright young son, and a motorcycle club. They came for Sunday dinners, their thunderous motorcycles lining the quiet suburban street, much to the initial alarm and eventual acceptance of the neighbors. They filled her small apartment with laughter and the scent of leather and motor oil, a scent she now associated with safety and love. One afternoon, at her new office, Eleanor saw a young intern, fresh out of college, being cornered by a demanding, belligerent client. The client was loud, dismissive, and cruel, using his position of power to belittle the nervous young woman. Eleanor watched for only a moment, seeing a reflection of herself 6 months prior. Without a second thought, she walked over. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped beside the intern and addressed the client in a calm, firm tone. The client, taken aback by her confidence, sputtered for a moment, then backed down, offering a mumbled apology. The intern looked at Eleanor with wide, grateful eyes. In that moment, Eleanor saw her own arc complete. She had been the victim, and now she was the protector. She was paying forward the strength the bikers had shown her. That night, tucking Leo into bed, he looked up at her. Quote 31, he said. Quote 32. Eleanor smoothed his hair back from his forehead, a genuine, untroubled smile on her face. She said softly. The story concluded on a warm summer evening at the Sons of Vulcan's annual barbecue. The air was filled with the smell of grilled meat, the sound of classic rock, and the easy laughter of found family. Eleanor stood by the picnic table, watching as Forge lifted a beaming Leo onto the seat of his gleaming chrome motorcycle. The setting sun caught the fiery volcano on Forge's back, making it seem to glow with an inner light. These men, once a source of fear and intimidation, were now the bedrock of her world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they started their engines, the combined roar